Akala is many things. He's a musician, but he's also one of the most important and thought-provoking public intellectuals that we have in this country. Now, it's no surprise that so many of you have begged us to interview him. We've finally done it, I'm delighted to say. Now, he's got this book, Natives, which explores racism. It puts it in its broadest historical narrative, as well as his own lived experience. He's absolutely fascinating. And I think this interview will make many of you look at this society that we live in a pretty different way. We'll start with a kind of softer end, empire.
Oh, that's
Ease the audience in.
Is that the softer end?
We're easing the audience in.
What about empire? That's a big word.
The British Empire is interesting, isn't it? That it's kind of erased from the kind of national discussion in any meaningful sense. I mean, if we're talking about the legacy of the empire and the failure to have any discussion about what the empire was actually like, what would you say?
Well, the word is right there, legacy. There is nothing more revealing of the fact that the British state and even the people that pretend to cheerlead for empire knew it wasn't a good thing than Operation Legacy. During decolonisation, the British state literally destroyed the evidence of what was done, the archives of most of the colonies, hid millions of files elsewhere in England, and this only came to light in 2011, I believe, because of the case of what is called the Mau Mau, but is the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, suing the British government because they were tortured, all kinds of horrendous torture during the concentration camps in the 1950s. So we wouldn't even know today that the British state had destroyed all the archives and burnt all the evidence of this supposedly benevolent empire, were it not for that court case. And so I think right there we have the main issue, is that the legacy of the British Empire was deliberately tampered with, deliberately interfered with, deliberately made to appear far more benign than it was. Nobody colonizes another group of people because they love them and because they want them to have democracy and the rule of law. We are still engaged in a regressive foreign policy, still involved in regime change and overthrows of other people and wars elsewhere around the world. If you have a rose-tinted view of the effect of British interference in other nation-states' affairs in the past, you'll be more susceptible to believe that there will be a benevolent outcome in interference in the present and in the future. And that's one of the reasons why a critical look at the past impact of British foreign policy is absolutely essential.
How do you link racism today and, you know, the hundreds of years of slavery and empire and colonialism?
You've always had what I would call prejudice or proto-racism. When you look at a lot of the scholarship, oh, that person looks different, they're funny, I don't like them. But the idea that groups were ranked hierarchically by inferiority and superiority really only arose in the 19th century and really only arose in Europe. When you say that to people, what people say is, that means you're arguing that, you know, Europeans are uniquely evil, when that isn't really what's being argued. It arose at that particular time for a particular reason, for a particular set of purposes, which were very much linked to empire. Europe came to control the entire world in a way that no other coherent political entity ever has until maybe the United States today, but even then not in the same way. And because of that, Europeans could argue at that point in history that they were biologically superior to everybody else, and this could explain that success. It was only ironically with the rise of Imperial Japan that this came to be called into question, because Imperial Japan proved that they were capable of mastering the technology and capable of being just as brutal, that Europeans started to say, well, maybe we're not superior to everybody. And even then it took ages. If we come to current kind of hot topic, knife crime, the idea of black on black violence is rooted in this 19th century pseudoscientific gene-based racism. Black people are genetically violent, so it actually doesn't make a difference whether they're well-educated or not, whether they're a Premier League footballer or a corner street drug dealer. It doesn't make any difference whether they're David Adjaye or Oswald Boateng or they're the guy who's actually out there killing people. It doesn't make any difference whether they're 16 or 46. Doesn't make any difference. I mean, if we're going to go with biology, my grandmother should be twice as likely to be violent as me because she's twice as black. The black on black violence narrative is literally rooted in that history of empire, in that sort of inherited historical guilt, in that fear, and in the sense that black people are just irredeemable. The violence in Glasgow or Belfast or Liverpool needs explaining via whether it's sectarian history or political conflict or class. When white people are violent, it needs explaining. Even when a middle-class white American kid kills half of his school, it needs explaining. When what is really a tiny fraction of black kids in London, as inexcusable as the behaviour is, participate in violent crime, even when they have one white parent and one black parent like I do, it's black on black violence and therefore needs no explaining because, of course, blackness is a perfectly sufficient explanation. So the legacies are very, very much with us to this day.
One of the big issues that people are talking about at the moment is knife crime.
Yeah.
And one of the kind of key focuses is on the issue of police numbers, that basically the way of solving it is just to reverse those cuts.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
I think this is a narrative, and it's dangerous to see politicians left and right endorsing this. A friend of mine, Dr. Baz Dreising, did a PhD when she went all around the world and studied prison systems all around the world. And in not one country could she find a correlation between tougher sentences, larger prison populations, and reduction of crime. And again, this is common sense. We already have the highest prison population in the whole of Western Europe. Even if we rounded up and took every black person out of prison and deported them all, we'd still have the highest prison population in the whole of Western Europe. So I think the tough on crime thing is about a way of excluding a particular group, along with the more police, along with the build more prisons narrative. There was a group of people that the political authorities in this country consider to be useless, surplus to requirements, and a threat. And so if you bang them up or over-criminalize them, they actually become, in a way, a great generation of nice middle-class jobs, psychologists, prison wardens. We've got a private industry now. I think it's between 10 and 20% of our prisoners are in private profit-making prisons. So crime in and of itself becomes an industry, and I think a lot of it, even though no one's going to say that publicly, is aimed at that. Obviously, from the police's perspective, if they can create a moral fear, and I say this as someone who, kids in my family have been stabbed, so I don't want no one messaging this. It's easy for him to say, it's not his child. Kids I love very much have been stabbed. Boys I grew up with got stabbed. I'm not saying this is just because I'm a little bit successful now, some distant foreigner. This is going on with kids I love right now. It's precisely because of that. Because boys that have done nothing wrong, just happen to be in the wrong place, and girls happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, are also getting caught up in this and getting assaulted, that I will not have them pay via this sort of black on black narrative for crimes they haven't committed. But also I fear that putting more power in the hands of the state and in the hands of the police and in the hands of the prisons is only going to make the problem worse for very obvious reasons. You have a larger prison population, you have more people growing up with a parent in prison. You've got a parent in prison, you're more likely to go to prison yourself. And so it seems that people are pursuing policies that feel emotionally good for a right-wing voter base, but in the long term will do nothing but cement what is essentially Britain's already growing underclass.
How do you explain the reality of racism to somebody watching who instinctively wants to oppose and fight racism in all its forms, but doesn't really understand the full manifestations of racism in Britain in 2019?
I don't know, and I don't know that it's my job or place to educate everybody. What I would say is, in a way, people are deliberately trained, again, to recognize the most obvious and virulent forms, because those are the kinds of forms of racism that intend to be engaged in by people who have no power. Someone can call John Barnes a name or throw a banana skin at him or whatever, and we can all say, oh, that's obviously horrendous. But, you know, stealing the entire mineral wealth of a country is something that very, very powerful people are only capable of doing. And if you demonize the natives, you know, they need your help to govern themselves. It just so happens they have a large amount of oil or massive diamond reserves in this place that we're going to civilize or save the natives from. That sort of racism, the idea that some people are inherently incapable of governing themselves, and the material benefits of racism, this is one of the things that people are deliberately not taught to understand. There is a cultivated ignorance about the way racism actually works, because it's very, very painful for many people. And I don't know when this is going out, but we've seen this today with Amber Rudd, you know, calling Diane Abbott coloured. It's easy to be outraged about that. Easy. But half these MPs who are going to be outraged voted for the intervention in Syria, they voted for the intervention in Iraq, they voted for the intervention in Libya.
And voted for the hostile environment.
And they voted for the hostile environment. Precisely. Massive structural race-based violence, cool. Call Diane Abbott coloured. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want that to perceived as me being dismissive. I know Diane receives a horrendous amount of abuse that is absolutely disgusting. What I'm trying to say is, everyone can recognise that that's disgusting, whilst at the same time engaging in backing policies that have much, much worse effects on actual people's lives.
I think if people like Akala were listened to more and were, I would say, in positions of power, this country would be a completely different place. I think that was, for me, absolutely fascinating and really shone a light on the way that this society is currently run and how it operates. But I want to hear your thoughts about it, so please do leave your thoughts. We've got loads of interviews to come. Please keep sending in your recommendations and we'll do our best. You know, that's what we're here for, it's a service. But as ever, leave your comments, subscribe. I'll see you next time.